Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Two of the world's most opaque and secretive organizations have just initialed an historic agreement. China's ruling Communist Party and the Vatican have decided to set aside decades of hostility. It's significant because China maintains strict control over all religions and their believers. China's roughly 12 million Catholics are divided between a state-run association whose clergy are chosen by the government and an unofficial church which swears allegiance to the Pope. The provisional deal is aimed at resolving the vexed issue over who gets to appoint bishops, with the Pope insisting he'll have the final say on names. This breakthrough could be the beginnings of a rapprochement for the first time since diplomatic relations were severed 67 years ago. While many Catholics have welcomed the pact, it's been condemned by others, including Cardinal Joseph Sen, the former Bishop of Hong Kong. What's been less discussed, though, are the secret talks that have been going on for years between Chinese and Vatican officials. One of those with inside knowledge is Francesco Sisi, an Italian academic and journalist based in Beijing. He was invited to interview the Pope more than 2 years ago. I sat down with Sisi recently in Beijing.
Francesco, you were one of the first journalists to interview the current Pope. Why do you think he wanted to talk to you?
I think he wanted to talk to you to talk to China. He didn't want really to talk to me. He wanted to talk to China. It took a long time to understand how we should gear. There was a lot of preparation. We should gear the interview. And I think he wanted to talk to the Chinese people as they are, not necessarily Catholics, not necessarily concerned about the same issues that concern and worry people in the West. But he wanted to reach out to the Chinese people.
Why?
He's Jesuit, therefore he is in the tradition of Matteo Ricci, and China is one big thing. And of course, China is the new frontier for the Catholic Church. It has been so for centuries, but especially now, I would say.
New frontier in terms of getting new members?
Also, but also having, I would say, a foothold here. China has, systemic differences with the West. Every country has an embassy here. The Catholic Church, for so many reasons, has been kept out of China, and this Pope wants to reach out to have a foothold here.
That's interesting. So are we looking at the possibility of the Vatican establishing a representative office in China, rather like the United States did in 1972 after Richard Nixon came here?
Absolutely, yes. And this could happen within this year, I would say.
That soon?
I think it is a possibility. We don't know. There are, of course, many things up in the air, but there is love in the air, as the song would say.
Now, if that happens, then the next logical step is the establishment of diplomatic relations.
Not necessarily. They are talking, as far as I know, about normalization of ties. That is because both sides want to keep Taiwan quiet and not worried. Next year there are very delicate elections in Taiwan and nobody wants to rock the boat there.
But do you think the Vatican would rather have diplomatic relations with Beijing than Taiwan?
I think this question is right. The Vatican is really, as far as I know, not worried about Taiwan per se. It is more Beijing that is concerned about the stability of the political situation in Taiwan.
Is this all leading, do you think, to the prospect maybe of the Pope even coming to China? I mean, this is a year of big political surprises. A Kim-Trump summit. Could we have a Pope coming to China?
It is a possibility. Of course, we have to see first the normalization of ties, and then the Pope definitely wants to come here.
He told you that?
Yes, many times, yes.
If that were to happen, let us imagine for a moment you have the Pope and Xi Jinping sitting in a room facing one another. They don't have a great deal in common, and yet in some ways they do. On the one hand, you have the Pope, arguably the most popular figure in the world right now, and on the other hand, you have the man who is arguably the most powerful leader in the world right now. What would they say to each other?
I think knowing a little bit the Pope, and from the outside looking at Xi Jinping, I think they're both very humane, and they have they would reach out to one another on a humane basis. I mean, the Pope is very interested in the people who meet him. He looks into them, he is curious about them, he's curious about their souls, he's searching in their eyes. And my sense is that Xi Jinping is also, in a similar way, the same. He's very bodily person, I would say.
But they come from sort of diametrically opposing camps. I mean, Xi Jinping is an atheist, a hardcore authoritarian communist, and then we have the Pope. What on earth do they have to talk about?
There is a human element in both of them. There is a human curiosity. Definitely the Pope is curious about Xi Jinping. I'm pretty sure about that. And I think also Xi Jinping has a personal curiosity about the Pope, who he is, what he's really looking like. So I would say they have a lot to talk about.
Who reached out to who first, and how did it happen? Was it the Pope who sent a communication to Xi, or was it the other way around?
I think it was the Pope first, who said publicly many times he wants to come to China, and my sense is Xi, of course, responded.
But something else happened, didn't it? Xi Jinping and the Pope were both in the United States at the same time, and the visit by the Pope actually had a profound impact on Xi Jinping. What was that effect?
Yes, I think that was the trigger of all things. In 2015, autumn 2015, they knew in China, Xi Jinping knew about the Pope, knew about the Holy See. He heard that this Holy See was important, but really he didn't understand, he didn't feel how important the Pope was and how important he was in the Western world and in America. So here it was, Xi Jinping expecting red carpet, expecting that the whole country, the whole United States would kneel down to him and forget about everything else and just pay attention to the emperor coming from China. And yet they almost forgot about him. But
he was eclipsed.
It was eclipsed. It was eclipsed by the Pope, who also eclipsed the presidential campaign. So these two things, he eclipsed the Pope and he eclipsed the presidential campaign, which you remember was very fierce between Trump and Hillary Clinton. And so Xi Jinping realized, oh gosh, this guy is the real deal. This guy is the real super soft power. And I think that, that changed the perspective.
He wants some of that.
I think he realized that the leadership realized, Xi Jinping we speak of Xi Jinping as the Chinese leadership realized that if China is to be the superpower, the great power in the world, must deal with the super soft power, the one guy who eclipsed the presidential campaign, who eclipsed the future president of the United States. He is more powerful in the global imagination than any political leader. So here we are.
And here we have two of the world's most secretive organizations, the Vatican on the one hand, Chinese Communist Party on the other, talking to one another. How are they communicating? I mean, have we had face-to-face talks between officials from both sides? And if so, what has been discussed?
Yes, they had a series of face-to-face talks over the past 20 years or so. Officials on both sides meet.
In Beijing and
in Rome, yes. This has been reported, and they talk to one another. And they've been talking about normalization of ties. There are numbers of issues, and they talk about that.
You have written extensively about this, but also about the possibility, the prospect, the likelihood of the Vatican and the Chinese Communist Party doing a deal on the appointment of bishops in China. How significant is that to people who perhaps wouldn't appreciate that significance outside of China?
The deal perhaps is even bigger than the appointment of the bishops. In a way, there was a basic agreement on the appointment of a bishop which was reached about a decade ago. So now we are speaking of a broader agreement about the life of the church in China. And that could be a massive historic watershed. Why am I saying so? Because for the first time ever in the history of China, the Chinese emperor, whatever you want to call it now, the party secretary or the president, allows a foreign presence, that is the Pope in this case, to have a say in the internal affairs of China. So it is massive.
But you could flick it the other way around. It's also giving the Communist Party a say in decisions made by the church, isn't it? Because
yes,
the Communist Party would still, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Communist Party, Xi Jinping, would still have the ultimate say over the appointment of bishops. Is that right?
I wouldn't know if it is the ultimate say. I would not say who is the ultimate say, because that is very delicate. But yes, of course, he has a say, he will have a say. But in this sense, this is more, historically, the church did a lot of these kind of deals in its history. The history of the church is about dealing with emperors. There was the German emperor, the emperor in Constantinople, the emperor in Spain. So it has all been dealing with the emperors, Napoleon, whoever. So the church has an experience, has a tradition, I would say, of dealings with emperors. The difference here is that China didn't have this kind of experience. So the church comes in with a history. For the China is totally a new thing.
We have seen in recent months that two bishops who were excommunicated by the Vatican, two so-called underground bishops, have now been reappointed. How unprecedented is that?
Actually, this is not really very unprecedented. Excommunication in the Catholic Church is a measure used for teaching. Is a kind of warning. I'm warning you that you are committing a serious mistake, it's a serious sin. So if you repent and regret, you will be reinstated and you will be forgiven. So again, the church has a lot of experience in that.
Is this arrangement, this deal, as you've suggested, going to give the Vatican more influence in China, but also the Communist Party a greater say in the decision-making process?
In a way, if I may be blunt and not diplomatic, the Communist Party already has a lot of say in whatever the church does in China. So, there is nothing new. What is new is that officially the Catholic Church will have a say in the life of the Catholic Church in China.
Parallel to the approved Catholic Church in China, we have the so-called underground church. And as you know, there's been some resistance from them. There have been suggestions by the former Cardinal of Hong Kong, Cardinal Zen, that giving the Communist Party more power over the Catholic Church is, in his words, evil and a betrayal. Does he have a point?
Not really, I don't think so. Why? Because who decides that there are two churches? It is the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church excommunicated Communist Party in the 50s because they were atheist. However, these differences between underground church and official church has been lifted with the letter of Pope Benedict in 2007. And therefore, the church recognizes there is only one church in China. But you are right, there are two communities, and maybe more than two communities, because the rift has been deep. There were a lot of feuds. There is a lot of hatred between Catholics coming from different tradition. You betrayed us, you didn't betray us, you sided with the communists, you didn't side with the communists. And so it is the task of the church, as Cardinal Parolin said, to try to bring these communities together.
Because these people in the underground churches, as you would know, see themselves as the true followers of the Pope.
I would say underground community, not church. It doesn't exist a community.
Why the distinction?
Because church is the church itself, the Catholic Church that defines a church, right? Why there is an Anglican church? Because the Anglicans are out of the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church doesn't recognize as a church. So it is, if the Pope recognizes you as part of us, you are no longer in a different church, you see. So it is very important distinction. One church, two communities. It is the Pope who decides so.
So is the Pope saying there are no underground Catholics?
There are no underground Catholics, yes. There are underground communities, not church. In fact, in China, there is nothing underground. The Communist Party knows everything. Nothing is secret in a way. What is important is that in the past, some Catholic bishops were appointed by the Pope and not recognized by the official Beijing government. But this is also part of the deal with the Vatican. So these bishops are being recognized, will be recognized by the government. So everybody will be official, so to speak.
What about the bishops? I gather there are at least 8 bishops currently detained here in China.
I don't know where you take this.
Are there any Catholic?
I don't think there is any bishop detained. As far as I know, there is no bishop.
Any Catholics detained?
Catholics, yes, detained. Catholic detains, possibly some priests detained. However, I'm not saying that the life of Catholic Church is glamorous and that this deal is wonderful and there's no problem. This deal is fraught with problems. It has a lot of issues, but unfortunately, the life of Catholic Church has a lot of problems in many countries. So.
As someone your home has been China for the last 30 years, you are an academic here, you obviously have very good connections with the Vatican. How do you personally feel about the prospect of this deal?
I'm personally excited. I've worked on this for many years. I've talked to both sides on a number of occasions. For me, of course, it's also in a small way, a personal achievement. The two sides managed to understand one another. That is not to say that they agree what the other side stands for or all the points made by the other side, but at least there is more understanding by both sides.
What is curious is that all this is happening at a time when China's becoming more authoritarian. We're seeing crackdowns on freedom of speech, on religion, not just the Christian faith, but also the Islamic faith. But why is Xi Jinping making an exception, almost an allowance for the Pope?
Two things. First, we just mentioned, because it is a super soft power, so you cannot just ignore this. This is a very important international actor, and especially when the international atmosphere outside becomes so tense, you have to deal with this soft power. Second, I would say there is trust between China and the Holy See. Why trust? Because there have been talks for many years, and talks went quite smoothly. So trust is extremely important for China, and is extremely important also for the Holy See. So they trust more one another. I wouldn't say they totally trust one another, but there is more trust.
I spoke about the resistance that this deal is having in some quarters, but what resistance is the Pope confronting in the Vatican?
A lot of resistance, and I would say the resistance is, there are two sets of resistance in a way. This Pope is extremely controversial, is in places in the Curia, his approach to some ethical issues is new, breaks some old molds of the Catholic tradition, but it's very hard for this conservative, I would say, to attack the Pope because he's more, so to speak, liberal on sexual issues, on family issues. But the China issue is more of, easier to grab and to use him as a tool against him.
And what about Xi Jinping? What sort of resistance do you think he is facing, if indeed he's facing any resistance at all, from elements within the Communist Party?
I think he's facing a lot of resistance. There are lots of people concerned because the Catholic Church is known to be a friend of the West and to have a hidden agenda, and that the hidden agenda is really to topple the Communist Party and establish God knows what.
But he must have seen, what happened in Poland more than 30 years ago, when he sees the power that the Church can have. There's potential risk here for Xi Jinping, isn't there?
Yes, there is, and there has been talk about this issue, a lot of talk about it, and I think correctly so. The Vatican said, yes, we had an objective role, not a subjective role, but the issue in Poland and in the former Soviet Union was that the system was broken and fragile, and therefore it broke down. However, they said, we helped Cuba to survive. Cuba is still a socialist country, so there is not an ideological prejudice against Communist parties, so to speak.
Is the Pope in danger of giving legitimacy to the Chinese Communist Party?
One can say so. There is this danger. What the Pope does is not giving or not giving legitimacy to political actors or players. Is not the Pope and the Church has long abandoned the idea of lending its credibility to any emperor, being Constantine or anybody. Rather, they want to advance the idea of helping the people in every place of the world and also helping peace. Now it is dangerous times, it's risky times, there is talk of a new Cold War. The Church wants to avoid, if possible, this Cold War.
And the Pope thinks that Xi Jinping can help prevent a third world war?
I would say that talking to Xi Jinping could help prevent. Trump is about to talk to Kim Jong-un, is willing to talk to Kim Jong-un, and I would say that Kim Jong-un is by far worse than Xi Jinping, so the Pope may as well talk to Xi Jinping.
Thank you.